after we found out, I think it was about 4.5 weeks, I convinced the doctor to do a scan, and we went in and Glenn was sitting behind the ultrasound lady, and she put it on, I could see the 2 separate eggs. We had the news of 2 beautiful little girls. I woke Glenn up, it was probably about 7 o'clock, and I said, I think we should probably go find the nearest hospital, because I'd seen a very small show of blood. Got the address, and we were at the hospital by about 7:10. Heartbeats were fantastic, nothing wrong. As soon as I laid down, pretty much the placenta and everything came out, sat on the bed, and it went from being 3 of us to about 18, 20 people within seconds, and everyone's eyes were popping out of their heads. And at this point we were under the knowledge that they were in individual sacs. There was no join, nothing, because of the twins were completely separate from all scans. So they pulled Rachel out, and pretty much she was out of the room within about 3-4 seconds. Delinda come out at 9:37, so it was an hour and a minute later. They told us that it was 2 girls, so I said first one's Rachel, second one's Delinda. And Rachel's birth weight was 680 grams. And Delinda's, she started at 612, but she went down to 550 very quickly. When they come to me and they said, okay, it's time to fly out, we'd already been told that Rachel was going to go at this stage before myself and Delinda. So my first impressions of the staff at Mater were, I suppose, supportive, understanding of the situation that I was in. I presume they do it quite a lot, which is sad, but they knew to not push things, to sort of keep positive but not give you false hope, I think is probably the best way of putting it. They explained the situation, and they said to me they're trying everything they could possibly try, but there probably won't be long that I would have both girls. And then there was Delinda as well, and her concerns of being so early. I had already in my heart known that Rachel probably wouldn't have long, and it was sort of hard. I sort of knew that Delinda was okay, and I knew that I probably wouldn't have long with Rachel, so it was sort of stuck, sort of one here, one there, and sort of looking, and there's people all around both of them, and it's sort of like not how I envisioned the first few hours of motherhood was going to be. And I went through the history of Dad and Mum and what we had planned, and how excited we were to find out that we're having 2 little girls, and I got to sing her songs and pretty much hold her hand and tell her that it'd be okay, and that we understand, and that she'll be able to look after her little sister and everything. And she gripped my hand so tightly for most of it, and then she pretty much went within about 3 minutes, and it was very peaceful. She didn't suffer, there was nothing. And then I think I held her for about an hour, so pretty much said goodbye, and it was at that point that I think the last sort of 25 hours I went, no, I need to sit down. So the whole time that we spent in the NICU system was just huge. We did 3.5 months in neonatal intensive care unit, and then about, I think she only did 4 days in high dependency, and then the rest was, I think, probably nearly 5 weeks to 6 weeks in special care. And the intensive care part was probably the hardest. Day to day, basically, she was crashing in the first sort of 8 weeks. She could do it between, on a good day, 2 to maybe 3 times a day. Our worst day on record was 6 times in one day, and you just sort of sit there and you're like, here we go again, and she'd come back through. But a lot of Delinda's issues were that she was just a tiny person in a big world. It took us 19 days to get our first hold of her, and she was tiny, and just, it was a 5-minute cuddle and we got our first official family photo. But those 5 minutes were worth everything. Just, we'd actually finally touched her. Well, yes, we could hold her hand in through the little portals and everything, but to actually hold her, and I think it sort of sunk in. I know when we both had our first cuddles, it was, it's nothing there. Yet this little person was sitting there and clutching you and just holding in. The little things that happened that were huge made all the other times that were heartache just disappear when she finally opened her eyes. And she did one day and the second eye the next day, and we're like, she's looking at us. If Glenn or I spoke, the head would turn, and little things like that was all we had to say. We're mum and dad, and the day we found out we got to take her home, it was all very surreal, I suppose. It was the first time we'd had 5 minutes alone with nobody around us, and yes, she come home on oxygen, and as it turned out, she had it for 1.5 years, and not full time, but by the end of it, she had it for night only. But to see how she strived with having it, her body would have had to work a lot harder, and she probably wouldn't have grew as much as she did. And she come off of it, and her body stayed strong, and she just went, whew, and we now have a little lady. Delinda's medical history and what she's up to now, we found out day before we left hospital that she was profoundly deaf, and we have an achieving child at 2.5 years who is well ahead of what the prospects that we were given at the start, which were exceptionally scary.
Personality, she's happy as Larry. She doesn't stop smiling. Doesn't matter what kind of day it is. She's always happy, and that's so, which just makes you happy as well. So you go through a lot, but when you see her smile, it doesn't matter what kind of a day you've had. It's great.